Hey everybody, we have a special crossover episode of the From Way Downtown podcast and the Point Forward podcast. Obviously got Pacers Bucks starting the playoff series this week. We got two Gannett properties, so we're bringing them together. I'm Dustin Dopriak, your Pacers insider. Jim Owczarski, the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel Bucks beat writer, is here with us to talk about this series. And how fitting is it, Jim, that this is where we start after a totally bizarre. First off, they played 5 times, and in one of those there was absolute madness and probably the strangest game I've ever covered. This fits, don't it? This makes sense that these two teams are have to play at the end of the year.
Yeah, why not? Right? It's
right.
January 3rd seems like a long time ago, right? I think that was the last of the 5 regular season games. Here we are in late April, mid-April. So, but yeah, I mean, considering, look, Tyrese Haliburton, one of Wisconsin's favorite sons, but not so much for the next couple of weeks, right? So it's a fitting matchup, especially considering the changes for both organizations after those 5 games, markedly different as well. So why not run it back a little bit, but yet with some changes?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, like they were just talking about this a whole lot. It does feel like a long time ago, I think, for just for both franchises. I mean, obviously, I think you consider just the different trajectories each went on. Obviously, the Pacers go out and get Pascal Siakam. They trade Buddy Hield. They trade Bruce Brown. Jordan Nwora also, and lose Benedict Mathurin just to a shoulder injury. The Bucks have a coaching change. You're looking at drastically different teams from the last time these two teams saw each other. I guess to start with the Bucks, I think I was just doing the math there. I think prior to New Year's, prior to that, 2-game home and home set they had on January 1st and January 3rd, but the Bucks were 24-8, and since then they are 25-25, if I did the math right. So what happened? Basically, big picture. How did obviously a lot of talent on that team, Giannis, Dame, everybody. And certainly made a move in hopes that of sparking things to go further than this stage. What has gone right? What has gone wrong in the time since?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Dustin. So this series, it's not so serious that it's a referendum on Doc Rivers, meaning winner. If they lose or whatever, he's going to be fired. That's not the case. But it kind of is. To your point, because I think one of the reasons Adrian Griffin was fired after a 30-13 record, 4 of those losses coming to the Pacers, transition defense was god awful. Defense in general was terrible. Yes, the Bucks scored a lot of points in that stretch. I think Giannis averaged 40 plus against the Pacers this season. But the offense was clunky. You go back to that Las Vegas loss in the in-season tournament, which, frankly, Doc Rivers was on site. A lot of this stuff sort of started to bubble up around that time in Milwaukee. The offense was disconnected. The players, Dame, Chris, Giannis, Bobby, etc., Bobby Portis says, hey, we need more from our coaching staff. We need some structure. We need to kind of know what we're doing.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons they made the change. It wasn't because the Pacers went 4-1, but it was sort of indicative of the issues under Adrian Griffin. And so Doc Rivers was hired to fix that. And what's interesting is, yes, that's the Bucks record. They backed into the playoffs, going 3-8 down the stretch. I think 2 wins in April. There's been some injuries there, which I'm sure we'll get to later. But the defense is better for sure. And the 2-man game between Giannis and Damian Lillard is better. It's still not great. They basically started to do it in late January. Again, another issue from early on. And so the Bucks, if Pacers fans want to go look at points per game, and they'll see that the Bucks really fell off, from that time. In large parts because Doc's trying to run a structured offense and trying to get some sets run with Dame and Giannis. And so, I mean, and at times that's been really kind of clunky. And, it's weird to say, Dustin, you mentioned the record, but watching this team every day, they're a better, more consistent team than the one that was 25-8. And that sounds so weird because the record should be what it is, right? But it's they've changed quite a bit since Pacers fans or the Pacers themselves really dug into this team.
Right. And you could say similar things about the Pacers. I mean, I think I don't think they are as explosive as they were in January. I mean, for a bunch of reasons. One, I mean, obviously you just take Mathurin out of the picture. Not that he was fantastic all the time, but he had, capacity, whether he was starting or coming off the bench, to have, every once in a while, one of those games where he went off and might get 25, 30, and you add that as an element to what the other pieces they have. But you take Buddy Hield away and it's a different team. It's a team that functions differently in terms of the shots it gets, the spacing it has, who's taking the shots, what's open for Tyrese Haliburton versus what isn't. And then you put Siakam in the middle there and he becomes sort of more of a focal point, whereas Buddy is a guy that's running around in circles and he's sort of taking people away from the play. And he might not have to shoot that much. Obviously, Buddy gets his, but it's not a dominant offense run around Buddy. But his gravity drags people away from the middle of the floor and allows everything else to operate. Whereas Pascal is going to bring people into the middle of the floor. I mean, he's going to be able to run around and initiate his offense from different points. But it's not as just wild, crazy, wide open as it was at that point. And even, you look at the difference between how they get to 150 against Atlanta in those games. They get there 3 times, which just tells you how bad Atlanta's defense is. But it's a different process. This time they had 80 in the paint. I mean, 80 in the paint on Sunday with Turner and Siakam. There's still a lot of pick and roll, but it's more about getting the ball in the paint and finding a way to finish there rather than the ball moving around and finding shooters as much. And I think I think people are going to see that they're different. If Bucks fans have been looking, obviously, I think Tyrese Haliburton is functioning very differently as well. Since they lost Buddy, they don't really have another option as a movement shooter, and he was facing double teams coming across the line so many times that basically they started to have to run him off the ball more and put the ball in Andrew Nembhard's hands more frequently just to get it down the court so he doesn't have, Haliburton's a lot of times the guys that's pulling the trigger on the offense, but he's not bringing it up every time to bring the defense to him immediately. He's trying to get it a little bit later in the possession. And so I think that's something that's going to change. Obviously, you've seen Tyrese's numbers go down also. And I certainly, people that were rooting for Tyrese as a hometown boy over the last couple of months certainly saw, didn't see the 30-point, 40-point nights that you were seeing in November and December and a little bit in early January before the injury. So that I think is a little bit different. So very, very differently functioning teams. And you mentioned obviously the injury. Obviously, this is going to this whole thing is going to hinge on Giannis if he's available or if he's not. Obviously, Milwaukee's just a different team. I obviously know how everybody is about giving you injury information and whatnot. So it's not like I'm sure there's not a doctor that's like passing you notes on the side necessarily. But you get a sense of these things in terms of how people talk about them or how they're listed or whatever. You just get a general vibe. So what are you taking as far as the vibe from that? I mean, first off, did they feel like they dodged a bullet, that it wasn't something bigger and more dramatic, meaning an Achilles, basically? And what is the sense of, what general idea do you have of a timeline at this point in terms of Giannis's availability?
Yeah, Dustin. So that was April 9th when Giannis pulled the left soleus muscle in his calf.
I've never heard of soleus before this.
Running to Google that.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. So just the process real quick. So he goes out in the third quarter. It looks very scary. Non-contact, kind of takes a couple steps, goes down, has immediate sort of shakiness, to unsteadiness to get to his feet, eventually goes off the court. The Bucks in the fourth quarter alert that it's this left soleus strain, which is very specific. And I think they did that with intent. Yeah. Dustin, to be honest,
sure.
I think if it was a calf strain or soreness, it would have left open such, anything for speculation, etc. Right. I was told he passed an Achilles test, when he came off the court. Just like ACLs, you can do that without any imaging. Sure. The imaging that was done was to just confirm that and the grade of the strain. And now the Bucks typically don't release grades of anything. Chris Middleton missed 16 games. They never they never said anything about what grade his ankle was. We can guess it was, a 3, something like that. So, interesting enough, Dustin, Damian Lillard suffered a soleus strain last year. So there was an in-house expert in that, and he said it is super painful, and happened after he had suffered a general calf strain. Like he had returned, and it was sort of a return to competition injury. Giannis, since the Pacers saw him last, has dealt with left hamstring soreness. He's missed games with that. He did have left Achilles tendonitis at some point. So that left leg, which was surgically operated on this summer, the knee hasn't been an issue, Dustin, but he's had these sort of soft tissue things throughout the year. So that's the backstory. Giannis famously played 6 days after it looked like he obliterated his left knee in the Eastern Conference Finals, and we know what happened in 2021. So he's sort of like a human Wolverine in that way. Like his healing is really weird. So basically the reporting on this is always going to be hedgy and cloudy and, well, he did this, or we think. Look, game 2 is going to be 2 weeks post-injury. It took Dame 14, 15 days to get back. He played 32 minutes in his return, and he didn't miss any more time. Look, the Bucks obviously want to win as many games as possible as soon as they can, like all playoff teams. But to put him in a spot, Dustin, to play in game 1 if he's not all the way there, and that goes again, and he's out to it's a wrap. So I'm not necessarily reporting this, but it's my feel from what I know and people I talk to. With the length of the first round series, Dustin, we're talking 2 days, 3 days off between games 1 and 2, another handful of games before game 3. I don't know if he'll play game 1. I feel like you get to that 2-week period, then you're in that, okay, he could probably come back. So that's just my guess, but it is Giannis. You always have to allow the alien DNA to kick in. But look, this team is top heavy, Dustin. It's top heavy. When teams do this, you lose one of the 3, the big 3. Like it's a problem, even if it's Damian Lillard and Chris Middleton, right? It's not the same. And if they go into game 1 without him or game 2, the Bucks are gonna have to work hard to maintain home court advantage.
Yeah. And obviously, to your point, I mean, Giannis is the franchise, capitalizing every single letter in those 2 words. You as you're saying, you're talking about a guy that we've never seen anything like him at all. We've never seen anything that looks like him. And the healing, the body, the power, the talent, the everything, you can't mess with that. Even if it costs you a playoff series, it can't cost you long-term Giannis. You still have to view, even if this doesn't turn into a title team, it's not any titles you have in the future are going to come on this guy's back. The one that you have in the last however many years since Kareem has come because of him. You have to, you can't do anything that's going to cost you that long-term. So I imagine, the smart thing to do is to be as safe and intelligent with that as you can. What, the one guy obviously who's kept him in it when they have, missed him, I think that's made a huge leap that has really impressed me, every time. And obviously he's gotten in some scuffles with the Pacers, but Bobby Portis, what a year, the fact that you can use him as a stopgap when Giannis is out and you're not guaranteed to have no chance. Just what's to speak to that? It would certainly be hard for the Bucks to win game 1 without Giannis, but it's not impossible because you have Bobby. Because you can plug him in there and expect production. What's impressed you about just the leap that he's made this year, and obviously the case he's making for 6 man?
Yeah, he was sort of not quite a minimum signing 4 years ago, but close. He was, and even Bobby admits he was maybe on the fringe, right? He had now been on 3 teams in 3 years, kind of thing, and really found a home and really developed and changed his game. And look, Bobby isn't a rim protector, where the defense changes, where Bobby's going to affect the Pacers, I guess. You mentioned Tyrese not bringing the ball up. Bobby and pick and roll is going to blitz, right? And that's where some of the difference in technique in the coaching, maybe Pacers fans saw Bobby blitz, but then there was like nothing going on behind him. Like, there's some continuity, connectivity there. Bobby's more confident in that. Giannis is roaming that help side, around the baseline behind Brook Lopez to clean stuff up. That's not happening with Bobby. But now on the offense, but he tries hard on defense, and that effort does mean something when you're 6'10". Offensively, when he starts, in place of Giannis, he's a walking double-double. He's 18 and 12, 13. Like, he's going to hit a couple threes. Those aren't just sort of stat fillers. Like, those are impactful buckets for this team. He's a three-point threat. Giannis is not. Giannis is going to go dunk on your head 20 times. Like, Bobby might hit 4 or 5 threes. He's got more of that mid-range game. So offensively, it changes what Milwaukee does to a degree. His screening and roll is different. He's more of the pick and pop big. And he's more willing to roll to the post or cut baseline. Giannis obviously does his thing, but again, the offense in that half court changes with Bobby. And he's a bucket getter. That's what he does. That's what he's best at. And you're right. Like, if game one, he's got to start, and Bobby Portis hits a couple threes or, gets into a little bit of a chest bumping dust up. Like, his Bobby at Fiserv Forum, Dustin, it's like that weird 1.5 points extra, right? That like he's one of and that's what role players are in the playoffs is at home. And so if there were going to be games Giannis has to miss to get right, having Bobby in that space at Fiserv Forum specifically, I think the Bucks honestly will feel not great because they don't have Giannis, but they'll feel good about, the offense running and defense, being solid enough in those first, game or two.
Right. Yeah, they'll be comfortable enough. You mentioned a little bit the two-man game between Dame and Giannis. I mean, how have you generally seen Dame find, comfort here? And just with that team in general, it seems like Dame and Giannis seem to be guys who are very honest, who put their feelings out, in public. They don't have a problem with saying a lot of this stuff out loud when they're working through stuff. I mean, they don't necessarily say, "Oh, everything's fine, it's cool." They'll be honest about like, I don't know if this is working, or I don't know if that is working, or Giannis saying that the equipment manager needs to step up. Like these guys, they float their feelings out there a little bit. I mean, how have you seen just the evolution for Dame in particular, and his sort of sense of his role, sense of how he works with Giannis, but also with the greater, Bucks roster and organization?
Yeah, I mean, look, and he'll say this, it's been rough for him, to go from being the man at a franchise for a dozen years to, the second best player. And honestly, like in some fans' minds, like he's Damian Lillard, but like Chris and Bobby won championships. Right. Won a championship. So, trying to fit in when you have always fit out like that has not been easy. Honestly, Dustin, the coaching situation, they made a change for a reason. Adrian Griffin didn't help some of that. Like the meshing of those two as an on-court unit, they were sort of left to their own devices, and that just doesn't work. Like there are reason coaches are coaches, right? So Doc Rivers addressed that immediately. He's spammed those actions. Sometimes it has looked just as unstoppable as everyone thought it would. There are other times where it's a little herky-jerky. And Dame is still, people want to pull up Basketball Reference and look at his game logs. Like he's having a poor shooting season. He hasn't really had explosive offensive performances that we've been accustomed to seeing or reading about. But he's also conversely been the closer. I mean, he's his fourth quarter scoring, his clutch scoring, that has remained intact. 92% free throw shooter. Those things. I mean, he's had a handful of double doubles. He's been a playmaker. So yeah, it's been a really interesting year, Dustin. I think this is going to sound wild to say. So they got him to win another championship, but also Chris and Giannis have not been healthy 3 of the last 4 playoffs.
Right.
And there's a reason the Bucks have not advanced out of the second round 3 of the last 4 years. That's sort of why you get Damian Lillard. Like if Giannis can't go,
right,
you have Damian Lillard. The problem, if it's a problem, is that he hasn't really looked like him. Right. He hasn't looked like that this year. And so, look, he's really excited about this playoff. We talked to him in Orlando, Dustin. He knows this is why he's here.
Right.
And so I'm really like, he's sort of this unknown X factor type. Despite the Dame time, despite what we've seen, it'll be really interesting to see how this series and this playoff run starts, because I think there is a little bit of who are we going to get, what are we going to get, especially in the light of when Giannis is actually available to go.
Right. And I think it just. There have been so much talk, obviously, around the Pacers about what this is going to be like. So obviously a handful of the guys have experiences. Certainly Pascal, Siakam has his experience having won a championship in Toronto. And so Miles and Pascal are both kind of coming it from different angles and telling them what this is going to be like. I don't think Miles has ever won a series. I'm almost certain of that. I mean, and I think the one that he talks about the most in terms of what the experience was like was what it was like to eventually get your soul ripped out from LeBron James, at peak level. I think that was, I think one of the Cleveland teams, maybe the last Cleveland team that he was on. Was it the last one? I think it was the next to last, like Cleveland team that went to the finals, and sort of having a sense of what it's like when that guy hits that peak and there's nothing you can do about him. But Pascal's the one guy who's the rest of them are just like, well, what is this going to be like? And they're trying to get a sense of, okay, how is it different basketball? And really being told that the stakes are higher, that every possession matters, and basically you can't make mistakes. And this team makes mistakes. Like this is a team that is good, really good at messing around and losing to Brooklyn and Toronto and, Portland and San Antonio and Washington, because why not? Charlotte twice, but then going out and beating the Boston Celtics twice and going out to beating the Bucks 4 out of 5 and beating Denver and beating, Philly with Embiid and all that. I mean, like this team can go as high as it can and low as it can. But, it has games that it has just gotten dusted and other games when it's beating people by 30. And I think they're getting a sense of, okay, well, this is a lot tighter and everything. And they're like trying to learn what this is like. And Haliburton is going to learn this for the first time and what it's like going to be keyed on he's obviously dealt with a lot of attention all year, but he's going to find out what it's like to be keyed on in a playoff series when they go for 7 days, knowing that you're the guy they have to stop. And what's that going to be like? And Dame knows that. Dame knows exactly what that's like. And I imagine there will be this sort of comfort level of, oh, this is who I am and this is what I do. And he'll find it. I mean, to your point, I think it's still a good sign, I would think, for the Bucks that he's doing as much as he can in the fourth quarter. I mean, it's what happens when that adrenaline kicks in or whatever that feeling is that those guys get in fourth quarters or playoff games or games that matter. I think you can still see that he still has that whatever comes upon him, Dame can still do it. It's going to be a fascinating playoffs, I think, to see how each of those guys finds this, because everybody's kind of got a new role. Like everybody's in a different place. I mean, obviously Siakam's won a title. He's in a different place. Tyrese is in a different place, having done this before. Even Giannis is going to be different, if and when, presuming he gets back, what it's going to be like to do that with a guy like a Lillard and, have the two of them together. It's all going to be different stuff. It sounds like it just has a chance to be fascinating stuff. So
real quick, Dustin, I'm curious your point of view.
Yeah,
how have the Pacers reacted to the change in officiating post All-Star break that's allowed for a little more playoff-like contact, maybe a little has that the Bucks? Now it's interesting. The Bucks have been outshot at the free throw line a bunch in a lot of their losses. But they have made no mistake. They don't want nor can they run up and down. They're big, they're physical, they're older.
Right.
They're ostensibly built for playoff basketball. So how has Indiana reacted to some of that officiating, and how do you think that's going to work a little bit when, like Tyrese might go for a floater and get knocked to the ground, but there's no that call that maybe sent him to the line is just that's just basketball in the playoffs.
It's a fascinating question because I'd love to be able to ask them all of this individually in a question, like in a situation where they would be able to say it candidly and not get fined.
Right.
So I don't think I'm stepping too far out of turn here. The Ty doesn't think he gets fouled nearly enough. Right. Like if you were to ask Haliburton, he gets the worst calls of any All-Star in the league, and he believes that like he should have started getting calls by now, and he doesn't. Like that is the sanitized version of how Tyrese feels about how he is officiated. And I think, and the tough part is like, that's probably how it's going to be for him for a while. And really to change that, he needs to change his body, frankly, before he starts getting calls. Because I think there's kind of almost like a bell curve to a certain extent, is that like when you're huge, they never call anything on you. And when you're tiny, they don't call anything on you. And it's kind of the in-between that gets the calls. Basically, if you got to have some muscle, some desire to go in there and mix it up, and they'll call a lot of stuff. And sometimes you're so huge, they're like, oh, you can take that. But like when you're Tyrese, you're like, oh, well, yeah, of course you got moved because you're 185 pounds and you didn't find the bench press in your gym until you were like a senior in high school. Like it's like, so yeah, we're not going to give you all of those because you're skinny. And I think there's some kind of like optical illusion to that he doesn't necessarily get that to begin with. I mean, you see, I mean, and they're all like this, but like how many times do you see Ty like, like coming off after a shot and jumping up and down, like, why didn't I get this call? So he felt that way to begin with. And his sort of view with it is like, all right, well, I already wasn't getting these. So, what's the difference for me? And on the flip side of it, now we can play defense. Like now we can actually guard somebody. And, like Aaron Nesmith, for instance, has obviously been taking on those big time assignments, for years. And in a lot of cases, been dealing with guys bigger than him, and he's had to deal with Giannis, and that's just not a fair fight. It just isn't. I mean, Aaron is one of the hardest working guys in the league, when he's given up 5-6 inches in that matchup. And it's just, there's not a lot he can do. He's doing everything to get in his way. But he keeps getting called for fouls and hand checks and everything. He's getting better, but in like pre-break, it was really hard for him to not, get fouls, and he's gotten a lot better. He guarded LeBron, I think, for 39 minutes, for most of 39 minutes, and only fouled him once at home. Now that was after. So on the flip side of this discussion was their game in LA that was just a nutty free throw differential. I think it was like. Was it 47-15?
Yeah, like the Lakers somehow managed to have a lot of.
Why do you think that is, Jim? No. Did they know somebody? No, I think there was a lot of tongue in cheek. Not even tongue in cheek. It was just trying not to get fined stuff coming off of that one in LA. The end of March. I mean, they just got it was. Like I said, I think it was 47-15 free throw differential. Or maybe
the Bucks had one of those against the Lakers at home too.
Yeah,
in a double overtime loss. It was, they also did not want to walk that line too closely.
Right. Yeah. But I think they had, because I think there's some similarities in terms of like thought of their idea of how they have to win and how it's different. They did figure out eventually that they can't. And Carlisle was of this mind to begin with, and the guys were saying they were of this mind to begin with, but they didn't really buy into it until after Christmas, like the immediate, and that Bucks series was part of, I think, a 6-game winning streak they were on, after January, when they moved Jalen Smith in the starting lineup for the time being. Obviously, they acquired Siakam and moved him back out, but it was like, okay, we're going to play bigger, going to move Nembhard and Aaron Nesmith into the starting lineup, and they basically looked at it as, we got to learn how to guard people, and they would rather have the benefit of being able to have some level of leeway for how physical they can play, to not be called for fouls, rather than get all the free throw calls on the other end. Basically to make themselves just a functional defense, they'll take the trade-off more or less, and it doesn't. Again, it doesn't make for they still end up setting a bunch of records this year. But I mean, I think, you know, they weren't going to average 130, you know, this way, but they'll take it because at least they can defend them. And I was just looking at the stats, and I think they're like 18th in defensive ratings since the break. And, you know, that's huge considering they were like bottom 3 for most of the first 3 months of the season. So that's a huge step in the right direction for them. And so they'll take getting some, you know, just getting not called for everything if it lets them play defense.
Yeah, that'll be kind of interesting to see how that plays out in the series, Dustin, because on one hand, if you're the Bucks or Bucks fan, you're thinking, hey, what better way to fix a clunky offense than to play a team that can't play defense in the Indiana Pacers, right? You know, the Bucks were the same way, right? Like one of the reasons the Pacers scored a bunch against them also was the Bucks were one of the worst defensive teams, much better than Doc Rivers. I don't think we're going to see a 95-90 game.
Sure.
But I also don't think we'll see the 138 to 135, right? So it'll be interesting, especially if Giannis is unavailable for however long. You know, the Bucks are obviously going to have to do some different things on that side to kind of slow it down. You mentioned Siakam, and that actually probably plays into the Bucks' hands a little bit, not having Mather, not having Hield, having a bigger guy, as you said, you know, in the painted area, in the mid range, that plays into the Bucks' hands a little bit. You know, they're just not rotating great. You know, as we know, their backcourt is not the most athletic or the biggest. So it'll be interesting, you know, after a week of prep to see how Doc Rivers and that group really reacts to that. So oddly, we're talking defense on a Bucks Pacers preview. Who would have thought?
Exactly. Like what have we seen in this series? Was it 140? Like what was the craziest score? Like 151 to 148? I don't know. Yeah,
it was something bananas.
It was something totally wild. What was this? 140, 126. You had 128, 119. There's another one in here. 126, 124. Yeah, I mean, just total madness across the board. 122, 113, 142, 130 across the board. Lots and lots of scoring in this, but. You know, you got to defend to win in the playoffs. You got to defend to win to some extent, regardless of who you're playing. I mean, like I said, I think you're probably looking at a series that's in the high hundreds, 110s, you know, rather than the 120s, 130s, but not in the 90s either. It's going to be one of the more higher scoring series, but it's not going to be what you've seen, what you saw in November, December, January. It's going to be a different deal. So it's going to be fun. We'll be going bouncing back and forth across the Midwest, you know, up and down I-65 and
I-94.
Next couple of weeks. So it's going to be cool. But Jim, thanks so much for doing this, man. Appreciate it. Thanks everybody for listening. And follow our coverage. Both obviously cover follow the Pacers, follow CindyStar.com. Check out Jim's work at the Journal Sentinel if you're following the Bucks. But thanks for checking this out.
Thanks for having me.